Did the New York Mets trade the right prospects to get Freddy Peralta, or will Jett Williams make the Mets pay?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On the show today, I am joined by Aram Leighton, the co-founder of Just Baseball, who is a prospect expert. His top 100 is the most comprehensive top 100 you're going to find that's not behind a paywall. And he is going to join me to talk about the trade for Freddy Peralta. The first segment, we'll talk about whether this was a good trade for the Mets, whether this was a good trade for the Brewers. The second segment, I want to focus in, and we're going to talk about the comparison between Jett Williams and AJ Ewing. Which one is the better prospect? Are the Mets going to regret not trading Ewing instead of Jett? I will go back and forth to the farm on that, which will bleed into our final segment, where I also ask him some rapid-fire questions to close out the show. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find some of my written work, you could do so, of course, over at justbaseball.com, where I work with Aram Leighton. And here it is, without further ado, a nice long conversation about the Freddy Peralta trade and if the Mets made the right move with this deal. All right, Aram, 1 week ago, you and I sat down on the Just Baseball show for about an hour where we were doing mock trades to complete the Mets off season. It was this great idea I had. I was going to write an article for the site. The assignment originally was get an outfielder, get a starting pitcher for the Mets. I had mock trades for Lawrence Butler and Luis Severino, Steven Kwan, Skubal, Mason Miller. Had all of this that I was planning. Then the Mets trade for Luis Robert, so we scratched the outfielders. Then you and I get on the show. We go through all these scenarios, and I still encourage people to watch that show. And I'll put a link in the episode description today because it takes you through what I think the process was this offseason for the Mets of David Stearns calling different teams. You kind of get a sense of, all right, trying to trade for Skubal, would it cost too much? Maybe trying to trade for Mason Miller, you'd have to give up more than the Mets be willing to. Ultimately, on that show, we came to the conclusion that Freddy Peralta was the obvious trade that the Mets should make, and then an hour later it happens.
Yeah.
So the thing about that show was you asked me point blank, would I be willing to trade Jett Williams and Brandon Sproat for Freddy Peralta? And on that show, I was hesitant because of how much I like Jett, and I said, we'll throw McGill back the other way. And ultimately, that's kind of what happens. It wasn't Trevor McGill coming back, it was Tobias Myers, but it needed to be a little bit more for a deal to get done. On that show, I was pitching Reimer and Sproat. And I kind of imagined that all off season, the way that this worked out, because some reports have come in that there was at one point in time a 3-for-1 that was trying to get done. And the way I view that is Brandon Sproat and 2 other prospects for Peralta, and they couldn't line it up. So here's how I envision it. Stearns is calling Matt Arnold. It's Reimer and Sproat. And all off season, Arnold's like, no, it's Jett and Sproat. And he just stayed on, it's Jett and Sproat, it's Jett and Sproat, it's Jett and Sproat, until finally David Stearns, when his team was all lined up, and this was the last piece, he relented and made the trade. What did you think about this return? Is it too much for a rental in Freddy Peralta?
I think this is the thing we always talk about. And when you were pitching the mock trades, not just for Freddie, but with Skubal or whoever else it may be, that's a 1-year rental, really high impact arm. I think it's always going to be an overpay. And so is every single team's model, right? I think Stearns knows that. And these are the types of moves you make when, you have a desire to get to the World Series and push the chips forward. So I think it's one of those situations where you don't often get a chance to acquire a frontline arm at all for even as little, quote unquote, as of a package like this. But at the same time, 1 year of a frontline arm, it's a lot to give up 12 years of, even if they're both end up being more of a role player type, right? Even if Sproat's a 4/5 and Williams is kind of a super utility guy by WAR, it would probably be a win on the Brewers side, but there's a lot more to it than that, right? Especially if the Mets make a playoff run this year. And clearly that was just one of a flurry of moves that we saw, and the Mets are probably still not done. I'll defer to you on that. But, I think it's a lot, but at the same time, I think you also have to look at the farm system and the situation there. And given where the Mets are at and the conversation that we're about to have about comparing Jett to somebody else, and if you compare Sproat to several other guys, where the Mets are at, I think you can make this trade and not feel it too much. Whereas if you're another team and these are your number 2 and 3 prospects or 1 and 2, and you don't have, and it's a steep drop off after that, I'd say maybe we need to look at the big picture unless you think, we're the World Series favorites this year. And I think for the Mets, it's a little bit of both where they feel like they can make a little bit of run. They can take the Dodgers maybe to put them to the test a little bit this coming season. But at the same time, if they don't, it stings a little bit, but maybe you have an inside track on Peralta now. And also, you have still one of the stronger farm systems. And I think Stearns has plenty of confidence in his ability to reload it. But I think the biggest thing is they have similar players or good players at both positions. Of course, pitching, they've got just a ton. And then on the shortstop / center field, just type of archetype, they've got several guys like that I think are really interesting.
Last year, it ended up getting reported that for Garrett Crochet, the ask was Sproat and Jett. Now, operating in hindsight, sure. If a fan wants to armed with that hindsight, say you should have traded for Crochet instead of Freddy Peralta because Crochet just had an unbelievable season. And if the Mets had Crochet last year, obviously it would have been a completely different year. What I think is important to note is the difference in where the farm system was then and where it's at now, because last year, that was your number 1 and number 2 prospect in the system, and you didn't have the breakout of AJ Ewing, and you didn't have the continued breakout of a Nolan McLean and a Jonah Tong. So, when it comes to that timing, this was the first time that they really pushed the chips in under David Stearns and traded some prospects that really hurt to trade. And so what are your thoughts of the timing of that when it comes to where this system's at in the David Stearns sort of life cycle with the Mets?
Well, and this was around the same time last offseason?
Before it went to the Red Sox. So, I don't remember the exact timeline of when that trade happened in the offseason, but it was reported after that the Mets said no to Sproat and Jett for Garrett Crochet.
Because I think, Sproat's going to have a nice career, and I think he's in a great landing spot with the Brewers. But I also think that Sproat was probably valued a little bit more highly after his 2024 campaign, where, I know he ran into a little bit of trouble in AAA, but so is every arm as they adjust to the new ball. And we just kind of saw that carry over into 2025, and then he figured it out and was successful, but it wasn't at the same level of utter dominance. I mean, Sproat was a guy that for me, in our rankings at justbaseball.com, we had him, towards the end of 2024, a lot higher than where he was at the end of 2025. So I think that's also a wrinkle in it too. There was also some injury concerns. There's a lot of variables there. So you could say maybe Jett was valued a little bit higher, but I don't think there's as much variance with him. I think Sproat was a guy that some in the industry were looking at as, one of the more exciting pitching prospects in baseball. Still a really good pitching prospect, still going to have a nice career. But I think there was some optimism for maybe even more high octane swing and miss kind of stuff with what we had seen, especially at AA, in the 2024 season. But I think with where the Mets system is at now, as you mentioned, there's just so many more layers of talent and so many more players that they probably feel confident in making a leap, this coming season that we may not even be talking a ton about. I know there's already been some buzz about a guy that already made a leap last season, and Jack Wenninger. There's probably several other arms internally that they feel good about, and helped make them palate this trade a little bit more, where they probably didn't have those layers, just a year ago.
Yeah, last year, again, these guys were your top 2 prospects where, yes, I think Sproat's stock took a hit, which made him a little more expendable, especially with the ascent of McLean and Tong. And with Jett, AJ Ewing, as we'll talk about in the next segment, made him a little bit more expendable too. Before we get into that debate that we're going to have in a second on Jett versus AJ Ewing, I want to talk about the Tobias Myers piece of this deal, because it really feels to me, again, like all offseason, Matt Arnold was dead set on, I want Jett Williams and Brandon Sproat. And I think the dialogue, was probably going on about all these different types of ways that the Mets could pull it off without Jett. I don't think they wanted to trade him. But ultimately, when you needed to get Peralta and then you're getting an arm with 5 years of control and an option, it was worth it. But I kind of compare it to Tobias Myers, the more I think about it, to the Brewers, the same way the Mets, in a way, viewed Jose Butto at the deadline.
Yeah.
Where it's an arm that is clearly a big league pitcher. I think Jose Butto is, a shoe-in to stay in a bullpen and pitch to a sub-4 ERA. And I think on a second division team, if he had the opportunity, he might be able to hold down the back of a rotation. But for the Mets, when you had all these pitching prospects coming up, he was going to be 40-man excess sooner than later. How do you think the Brewers view Tobias Myers, where they decided, even though it's 5 years of control, yeah, we'll put him in the deal? And how should the Mets then view him?
I was surprised, honestly, because I think Tobias is pretty underrated, right? We talked about him as a guy that made a playoff start against the Mets, right, and was looking pretty good then. But even when you look at what he did last year, it wasn't as sharp, let's say, but it was still pretty good. And he proved that he's capable of coming out of the bullpen. His final 16 appearances of the regular season were out of that bullpen. Maybe one was as an opener. Actually, let me remove one of those there, but the rest were out of the bullpen. And 15 appearances, he pitched to a 1.98 ERA in relief. Is it like big swing and miss stuff? No, but in 27 and a third innings, he allowed just one homer out of the pen. And that's in the worst case, right? Or actually the best case, I should say. That means your rotation's filled out. You don't need a spot start from Tobias, and he's working more as like a swing man or middle relief guy. Great. You have him for a long time, but as you know, injuries happen. And this is a really solid pitcher to be able to plug into the back of your rotation. I kind of imagined an iteration of, finally getting the Brewers finally caving a little bit on Myers, but then saying like, all right, well, we're going to need one more piece then. And Stearns just being like, no. And like, come on, just give us like a flyer, bottom of the top 30 guy, or whatever. No, this is it. Like I don't even want to give you Jett and Sproat. But I think honestly, it turned out to be a pretty nice throw in here that I'm surprised the Mets didn't have to tack on another like flyer prospect or something else going the other way, because I think that shows you how apprehensive the Mets were about Jett and Sproat for just 1 year of a player. And I think when we talk about the model and that side of it as well, and the WAR offset, this is a huge part of that, because now with a handful of years of Myers, again, even if he's more of a swingman or whatever, he's going to give you value and help claw back at the 1 year rental that you traded 12 years of control for.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one where I think for the Brewers, while it's not like they were trying to get off of Tobias by any way, but it's a matter of, all right, we're going to get Jett, who they probably believe is going to be, they're probably buying into the highest outcome, which we'll talk about in a second, of maybe a guy that can be an all-star second baseman. That was something that came out recently, that the Mets' highest outcome that they viewed of Jett Williams was an all-star. Actually, I don't know if it was all-star. I think they said Gold Glove second baseman, which we'll get into in a second, because I don't know how much you like his defense. But again, I think for the Brewers to get Jett, to then get a guy in Sproat that's a couple years younger with full options compared to Tobias, it just made more sense for them. What we're going to talk about next is the Jett Ewing, or Jett Williams versus AJ Ewing debate.
That'd be a good player.
Jett Ewing would be a great player. We're going to go through that here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever. So just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out the forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online, and they're going to handle everything for you, from W-2s to self-employed forms, and they will work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and you'll get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's just a huge time saver. I know for me personally, my taxes can get pretty confusing because I'm self-employed for my two jobs, and to track down all the forms and the deductions and all of it, it's just been a lot easier for me to have that peace of mind knowing there was an expert on hand that was dealing with it all for me. And for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert did not file for you last year, all you have to do is file by February 28th. Take the taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. but you did have Ewing above Jett in your latest top 100. What drew you to that conclusion when you were doing this last update?
Sometimes being the first kind of sucks, right? You end up getting beat around by people that are like, you're wrong. No, Jett's better, whatever. And then when other people come around to it, maybe a little bit later, no one remembers that. And then except for you. So thank you. And then, then it's like, oh yeah, Ewing's better. It's now I still think it's split. It is funny to see some other just conversation around it now, because when we did put the rankings out, I felt like it was 90% pushback on like, oh no, I think Jett's the better prospect. And, I understand it. I think it sounds weird, but like, I think there is more upside with Jett, just because I think he's going to slug more, which is a funny thing to say when we're comparing, 5'10", 185 pound kid to, I don't know what the actual measurables are on Jett Williams, but it's probably closer to 5'6", right? And there's just the ability to pull the ball in the air. And I think that whole aspect of his game, but I just don't like betting on that being the differentiator when I like Ewing some of his parts to very easily differentiate. I think when you look at speed and base running ability, it's even, if not maybe a little bit more explosive from AJ Ewing. When you look at the defensive side of things, which I think is really important for players of this archetype, I'm still not the most confident that Jett's going to be very good at, shortstop or center field. I think he can be fine in center. I don't think shortstop's really, I never really thought that was in the cards for him, maybe in a pinch. I always thought it was more that second base center field profile. And even in center, I think it's closer to average, where, I look at an AJ Ewing and I think he could be above average out there. And I think he could be excellent at second base as well. So I think for a player like that, that helps a lot as well. Is Ewing going to slug as much? No, but I still think there's room for more in there with him as he continues to tap into a little bit more impact. But Ewing is much better bat to ball wise. Yes, the swing decisions are, that's like a calling card for Jett, but it's not like Ewing is any slouch in that regard either. Chase rate was right about 20%. He walked at a 12% clip, and he has another year here, right? He's a year younger than Jett Williams, and I think the availability has been a thing. I think there is some concern about injuries with Jett as well that I try not to value too much, but when you're splitting hairs, can bake into the equation a little bit. But I think the number one separator for me was, I know this guy's going to put the ball in play a little bit more. I know he's going to get on base at a similar clip. And then I think the other sides of things, where you look at from a WAR perspective, like I think you're going to get premium defense, or at least really solid defense in center field, versus like getting by there, and potentially plus defense at second base versus probably just being average there.
I think for me, for those who've been listening to the show this offseason, even though I rank Jett Williams above AJ Ewing, because I've already sort of come to the conclusion that the Mets may value Ewing's future more because of, the need in center field, and also because of your ranking, it's been easy for me to kind of defer to what I think the Mets are thinking, what I know you think, and not kind of bash my hand against the table and say, I think Jett's better. But I'm going to try to do that right now, because I did rank Jett Williams above AJ Ewing. I'll be honest, I even looked back to my last top 10. I had Brandon Sproat over AJ Ewing as well. And the only reason why I wasn't as high on AJ Ewing when I made that last ranking is just because I think right now AJ Ewing is in a similar place to where Jett was after 2023, where you look at Ewing last year, 315 average, 401 on base, 429 slug. Like you said, walked at a 12% clip, struck out at about a 19% clip, a 147 WRC plus in 124 games, with about a 75-25 split between mostly high, but he had a month in Double A at the end of the season. In 2023, Jett at 19 played most of his season in low A, but still probably about 40% between high A and then a cup of coffee in Double A. His slash line that season was 263 average, 425 on base, 451 slug, a 144 WRC plus. So the WRC plus very similar. They got there in different ways. Jett with more power, Ewing obviously a little bit more just hitting for a higher average, more on the base pass. But the thing for me with Jett, he hit 7 home runs in 36 games in Brooklyn at 19.
Yeah.
At a 182 WRC plus. At the time, everyone was in love with this prospect. He then has to deal with some adversity. He gets hurt, loses a year. Comes back in his age 21 season, and in Double A, he hit 281 last year, 390 on base, .477 slug, a 156 WRC plus. Yes, he struggled in AAA, but the walk rate was still around 10%. The strikeout rate didn't jump. Yes, he hit 209, but he also was able to hit 7 homers in 34 games there. So I just look at where Jett's at compared to Ewing, and he's already faced some adversity and bounced back, where AJ Ewing hasn't been subject to adversity yet. So I just don't know how Ewing is going to now handle AA and AAA and then eventually the big leagues, where Jett, because he's gone through some adversity and come out the other side of it, I like that component. I also just like the more complete package of getting some home run power. And here's my question to you. Do you know the difference in extra base hits between AJ Ewing and Jett Williams in 2025?
I don't, but I imagine it's probably pretty staggering.
So it's a difference of 58 extra base hits for Jett in 130 games, 38 extra base hits for AJ Ewing, 17 homers for Jett, 3 homers for Ewing. Now, the difference is AJ Ewing stole 70 bags, and he only got caught 11 times. Jett, definitely the stolen bases are coming down. He had 34 last year, 9 caught stealings, compared to a couple years ago when he was 19. Didn't add as much muscle as I think we've seen the last couple of years. Maybe slung him down some. He was 45 bags that year, caught 7 times. But to me, it's the power component that's really interesting here. But again, AJ Ewing is going to, I think, bring, especially in the big leagues, a much better base stealer. I think that might be phasing its way out of Jett's game a little bit,
which is a little bit of a concern, because then that for me is like, okay, yes, the power, he's going to pull the ball in the air, and he's clearly, Jett's definitely grown into some pop here, but it has come at the expense of, I think, one of his more important assets, which is the speed. And you're betting on a 5'6" guy to slug. The thing is like, if somebody could, it's him. And we have some precedent obviously in the league, but I think the approach really helps with Jett because it's something that he can really leverage. With such a compact strike zone and a guy that knows exactly what he wants to do at the plate, it's really hard to not end up giving in to what he is looking for. So I think that is going to help him. Where I'm holding out a little bit of hope here is, especially with the extra year that AJ has to get to where Jett is now, given that he's about a year exactly younger, is that Ewing actually hits the ball hard. Like, it's not bad at all in that regard. It's just more of that top of the order, spray the ball around the yard type of guy, which I know is not as in vogue now in Major League Baseball, but I think there's a modern version of it. And I think when your average exit velocity is 89 miles per hour, which Ewing's was last year, like, that is the modern version of it. Your expected stats are going to be better. You're going to sneak more base hits through, each side of the infield because they're just being hit harder. You don't have to be as perfect as like a Juan Pierre used to be, back in the day. Right. So, and even like a Chandler Simpson, right. If he didn't have 80 speed, it would be a challenge. But I think that's the other thing with Ewing is he's going to be able to get his base hits because he's so fast out of the box, just chopping balls into the ground. But clearly he also can hit the ball pretty hard with the 89 mile per hour average exit velocity. Just for comparison, that's 1.5 ticks above Jett. The big difference is Jett's average launch angle was 20 degrees and Ewing's average launch angle was 12 degrees. Now, you don't want Ewing to get away from who he is, right? Like, in the name of trying to hit more homers, he then, struggles to cover the top or whatever it may be, because that actually is the one thing with Jett Williams, right? If you want to try to beat him, you got to locate it at the top, but that's not easy to do because the top for everybody else is a ball for Jett Williams. And if you tug it down 2 balls lower, it might be gone with the way that he's able to turn stuff around. So it's funny though, like, that is the one little Achilles heel is he gives up that zone whiff at the top region of the zone. I think that's going to allow Jett to still be really successful. I don't think it's going to hold him back. I'm interested to see if Ewing can get into a little bit more game pop without compromising his ability to hit four seamers. Because on the other side, Ewing had a 91% zone contact rate on four seam fastballs this past year. Just for comparison, Jett Williams was 76.5%. So again, that's not really a true indicator of success because clearly Jett has his strengths and knows how to leverage it. And he doesn't chase fastballs. It's a 15% chase rate, but it's something that's like Ewing could even give up a little bit at the top in the name of trying to elevate a little bit more. And the raw EVs are there. So that's the one thing I'm interested in. Can he tap into a little bit more power? Because even if we're talking about Ewing as a 10 to 15 home run guy now, he just closed the biggest gap in the conversation between these two guys.
So the one last thing that gave me pause on Ewing that I'm curious your take on is just, I think everyone is looking at the 28 games in AA, and they see 20 games in AA, the WRC plus was about the same. I think, when you see someone
the walk rate,
when they see it, it's exactly what I was going to say. You beat me to the punch. The walk rate dropped off a lot, and that was the other thing that gave me that pause. Now he hit 339, so he probably was feeling himself. He was hot. He was just letting it rip. But it's 28 games where I think there's a lot of the people that are super high on him right now that are just like, all right, AJ Ewing went to AA. He conquered it. He's good. I just think there's a big challenge ahead this season, spending a full year instead of one hot month in AA.
I think you are 100% correct on that. I think that is the one area where, again, when we're seeing some of the rankings now, it's like, I don't think I can match some of these super bullish Ewing rankings that we saw, and I love them. That's the thing. That's why I was venting off the top. Is like, now not the high guy, I guess, on him anymore. It's definitely something worth noting. I talked about it with a lot. We talk about it with a lot of like successful hitters in the minor leagues, especially the hit tool guys, where it's like, how do you tell a guy hitting 330 to swing less? And he wasn't swinging a ton at the lower levels, but again, he's probably feeling himself. But I do see one area in those 33 games, if you add the postseason in as well, that stands out to me, which is he wasn't recognizing those sliders as well. And the uptick in stuff in AA is massive. I'll talk to guys that, will tell me the stuff was better in AA than AAA. Like in terms of stuff, like pitch recognition, honestly, AA is usually the test, right? And I think that's something to monitor. It's a very small sample, so I don't want to take too much from it, but that chase rate did creep to 35% specifically against sliders. Everything else, he was fine, but that did creep up there. And just for reference, like it was 10% lower across his other levels against that type of pitch. So definitely worth noting and worth following. And I think that would be, if you ask me going into the year, like what could be the thing that makes AJ Ewing's season frustrating? I think it would be spin rack. But I imagine, and that's why it's usually really good to get that AA taste before the end of the season. Smart hitters, smart players, and smart organizations get that recon, and AJ Ewing should be just seeing spin, spin, spin all offseason from the machine, training shapes, whatever it may be. And I imagine he is. But sometimes it's just an Achilles heel. So that's going to be the interesting thing to monitor. Whereas for Jett, and I think that's probably another big separator, the guy pulverizes sliders, absolutely destroys them. Last year against sweepers and sliders, Jett hit 290 with an 890 OPS, and he only chased 18.5% of the time against those pitch types. So if Ewing's slider issues continue this coming season, then I would look at it and say, ooh, okay, yeah, maybe Jett's floor is just comfortably higher offensively and enough to offset, I think the defensive edge that AJ Ewing has.
And that's where I landed on the ranking of just wanting to see a little bit more from Ewing before I anointed him ahead of Jett, where I just felt like with Jett answering the questions in AA this past season, I felt pretty comfortable. You know what? This guy is going to hit in some level. And I want to give you a crazy comp on the other side of the break here of the highest possible outcome of Jett Williams and why I am so high on him. And then I'm going to hit you with some rapid fires too before we close the show. So we're going to get to all that in just a bit. All right, Aram, I know that player comps can be tricky, and so it's not fair to a player when you do this, but I'm going to comp Jett Williams to a Hall of Famer. I think the thing that I've always talked about with Jett and what I saw as the highest outcome that the Mets could get to is I looked at a lot. Jose Altuve coming up. And it's the small guys, so they're tough to pitch to, who has really good, plate discipline recognition. And what I see with Jett Williams, and I think to me, the 7 homers he hit in AAA kind of confirmed this, where again, the walk rate, the strikeout rates, they stay the same. If he continues to get himself into good counts, and if he's in the big leagues, he's batting leadoff in an inning, and he ends up working a 3-2 count, which I think even with the new challenge system, he could even get into those counts even more. All of a sudden, if I'm a pitcher and I got 5'6" Jett Williams standing in front of me in a 3-2 count with nobody on base, I'm going to challenge him. And like you said, maybe they challenge him with the fastball up, but if they tug that down a little bit, he's going to hit his homers. Jose Altuve, funny enough, never a top 100 prospect, which was wild looking back to see the rankings. So this shows how we never really know, right? But in the minors at the end, he hit 15 homers his age 20 season. He hit 10 homers in 87 games his age 21 season between high A and double A. Gets called up to the show. First 3 seasons of the big leagues, Jose Altuve hit 19 home runs. Never hit more than 7 in a season. Fourth year, he pops 15. Then he hits 24 in back-to-back seasons. And now we expect Jose Altuve to hit 25. I think at some point, Jett Williams, as he gets acclimated to the big leagues, I just think he's going to keep on adding power that defies his size, where I think one day Jett might be a 25 home run guy, and Altuve's grabbed 31 twice. Yeah. So that to me is the big thing, is if Jett can have that type of a power display in the big leagues, that's where I think that this trade could end up coming back to haunt the Mets a little bit.
Yeah, I will say, I think there's a world where the ceiling of Jett makes it haunt you, whereas like Ewing, I think the floor almost would have just guaranteed that you're going to lose in the WAR proposition. But in terms of like unique player who could have all-star offensive upside, like there's the ceiling there offensively that I think is possible if everything goes right, that I think could come back to haunt. I think ultimately the swing and miss is going to be a little bit too prevalent for him to fully get there, right? Because he hedges with the approach, but I do think there may be points where pitchers are a little bit more rewarded for challenging a Jett Williams versus like a Jose Altuve, where through like a lot of his peak years was just impossible to punch out, it felt like, and really effective within the zone. If anything, it was him more expanding. But that's the thing with Jett, is good luck trying to get him to expand. He's a very difficult player to assess, and maybe that's even part of the reason why I gravitate towards a Ewing, is I feel like I know what I'm going to get there, and that the defense and speed really and contact ability just makes me sleep a little bit more comfortably at night. But at the same time, Jett hit 17 homers last year. The extra base hit totals are ridiculous, and if he's able to match that, at the big league level, this is a really dynamic and unique player. And the other thing is, and I think this should be considered more, especially with him in Milwaukee, what if you stick him in left? If you stick him in left, he's got a good arm. He's going to cover a lot of ground. And all of a sudden, he might start grading out as an above-average defender. And if Jett's an above-average left fielder with those offensive skills that we talked about, all of a sudden, now we're looking at a very unique and valuable player.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember you asking me, I don't know if it was on the Just Baseball show when we were just talking about this trade after, you asked me if I thought that the Brewers valued Jett more or Ewing more. And I said, I think the Mets just didn't want to trade Ewing. Who knows? Like the more that I kind of talk through it and think about it, the Brewers might have wanted Jett all along, and maybe they didn't even want AJ Ewing in comparison. So it's I think from the Mets perspective, I'm not, for fans who are listening to the show that are like, Ryan, I thought we loved the Peralta trade. What's up? I still do. The Mets needed Freddy Peralta. I think personality fit is going to be perfect. Hearing him talk, I did a whole show about this today. Hearing him talk about David Stearns and being a Met and all these things, I am pretty confident they're going to get an extension done. Exactly. And that kind of wipes.
And the second that happens, it's the most moot point ever. Like it's like it doesn't even matter what these guys do over there.
Exactly. And so I think that's what's going to happen. I think ultimately the Mets believe, and we'll talk in a second, about Carson Benge to the point where they're pretty confident that they have 2 outfielders for the next 4 years with Soto and Benge. And I think they believe that AJ Ewing can end up filling center field. And then again, if you block up Peralta, it's all a moot point. So I still think it was a good trade. I still think that it was a move the Mets had to make. But am I still a little bit curious and nervous about what Jett Williams is going to become? Absolutely, and that's what makes it a good trade.
Yeah, I think that's the very definition of it, right? And we always say, like, it needs to hurt for both sides. For me, like, there's not a lot of precedent for me to call back to. So the idea of what Jett could be kind of breaks my brain too. And I think that's where it's going to be fun to just monitor and use this as like a learning experience for the next player that comes around. But usually when they are that size, they don't have the power that he has. So I can't wait to see what it looks like this coming season. I also can't wait to see how they utilize him. But I think with the Mets roster situation as it currently is, there is a very solid case to be made that Ewing's skill set fits their 40-man needs a little bit more, both short-term and long-term.
Yeah, I think so. And especially as we're going to talk about Brett Beatty in a second here and potentially playing some left field, that even kind of mitigates what Jett might have been for the Mets this upcoming season. But I have 4 rapid fires that I want to throw at you to close out the show. First one, if Jacob Reimer can't play first base, and now we're just focused on can't play third base, it ends up at first, and we're just focused on the bats. Jacob Reimer or Ryan Clifford, who do you then like more?
Oh, after this past year, I think Clifford. And I think there's even a case for just if it's a 40 to 45 grade defense at third base, with Clifford at least being able to fill in and corner outfield as well. I think there's a Clifford case. He was, for my money, one of the most improved players in the Mets system this past year. And honestly, in the minor leagues, he hit the living crap out of the ball. It was a hard hit rate of 57%, a 90th percentile exit velocity that I think paced the organization at nearly 109 miles per hour. Everything was improved from Clifford. And he's like a prospect fatigue guy. He'll be 22 years old for the entire first half of the season. I like Clifford the more I watch, and I'm more and more bullish on him.
Yep, I also had Clifford ahead of Reimer when I did my Mets top 10. Jack Wenninger, will he be a top 100 prospect for just baseball by opening day?
Yeah, he's got a good chance. I'm going to dive in a little bit more in the coming week or two. We're updating our top 100 very soon. But I mean, everything I hear from other folks in the industry, everything I've seen from him, the way that he finished the year as well. I mean, this guy's really exciting. And I think, again, he's a big part of why I believe the Mets were okay moving a Brandon Sproat, because it's not like Wenninger's 3 years away. He's probably going to start next year in AAA, and you could get some action if they need it this coming season.
Absolutely. And I think the presence of Wenninger, Tong, Christian Scott, that's why I haven't spent much time asking you if it made sense to trade Brandon Sproat. I think it made a lot of sense to trade Brandon Sproat with where the Mets are at. I got 2 more for you. I think I'm going to save the big league question for last. So Carson Benge, the Mets have just been rolling out the red carpet. He's going to have a chance to win the job. He's going to have a chance to win the job. Do you think the Mets are better served chasing the PPI that they think they are with the combination of McLean and Benge, or trying to manipulate some service time and get an extra year of Carson Benge? Like, do you think, I guess my bigger question is, do you think there's a chance that Carson Benge can win the Rookie of the Year this year? Is there a world where that happens?
I do. And I mean, for us too, we've definitely were definitively the highest on Carson Benge since the jump. I think we were the first to put him on a top 100 list, and we were the first to have him in the top 50, and then we were the first to have him, ahead of that. And I mean, clearly the Mets absolutely love this guy. Another thing that I think is really valuable with him is the fact that he can fill in center field as well, and I think play fine out there if you need it. It is an interesting question, because if he was your only iron in the fire for Rookie of the Year, I'd be like, all right, let's go for it here. But he may very well lose to his own teammate. I think his own teammate is the favorite and should be the favorite. We'll see what the odds are when they come out. But that's part of the reason why, and I hate advocating for service time manipulation. You're just trying to put yourself in the front office's shoes. Like, what would you do? I would consider the extra year of a player of his caliber and thinking how good he's going to be in year 4 and year 5 to be quite valuable. But then you look around. I mean, yeah, JJ Weatherholt's a threat, but I think Benge does a lot of the same things offensively, and is probably, especially in a corner, going to be a better defender. And then you think about how much it is a defensive award, or excuse me, just like a position player award. I think there's a world where McLean could absolutely shove and still kind of get hosed by his own teammate, which we saw with the Braves, right? When we had Spencer Strider. I mean, how much better is Nolan McLean? I love him. How much better could he possibly be than that Spencer Strider season? And Mike Harris ends up taking it, right? So I think it makes sense to have both irons in the fire there. And I do think it sends a good message to the team. I don't think Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor want to see, guys service time being manipulated when Benge is probably being sold to them and being sold to the whole team as a key part of their future. He's probably going to have a great spring. He's going to continue to impress these guys. And then what kind of message does it send when he's back in, both to him and the team when he's back in Syracuse for, a month and a half when it's freezing cold, by the way. And like there might be injury risk there. I don't even know.
Yeah, I went to Syracuse. Well, you actually went to Syracuse. I visited Syracuse in May, and I was like, Aram, how'd you go to school here? This place is miserable.
It's terrible.
So yeah, I think they're gonna give Benge a chance, and if Benge has even a solid spring, I think they go with it just because their other options just aren't great. All of a sudden now you're making Brett Beatty an everyday left fielder. And I think that's asking a lot. They want him in super utility. And I think it's a perfect way for him. Have him, if there's a tough righty, you can slide Carson Benge in the center, sit Luis Robert, play Beatty in left, but also Beatty can get time at first, at third, at second. So I think the super utility role is great for Brett Beatty. I don't think that everyday left fielder from jump should be. But again, if Benge has a bad camp and Brett Beatty proves they can hang out there and tears the cover off, like it.
I'm sure. Yeah, you won't need to twist their arm to send him to Syracuse, but I think if he's performing, it's the obvious move there. And again, Benge would be great out there defensively, and Beatty would be a little bit experimental. And you don't want to start slow, and I think you want to put your best foot forward. And I think there's a strong case that Benge is that. And then I do think in the grand scheme too, when it comes down to Benge is a great pre-arb extension guy, because the sum of his parts is so valuable with the ceiling that you can still dream on. I think that good faith does go a long way in those conversations ultimately.
That's a great point. I think Freddy Peralta is the obvious extension candidate in camp, but Carson Benge, seeing end of mid-March, seeing the Carson Benge pre-arb extension where you just say screw it, you get a couple of the free agent years, so you just roll that. And it's always, we've seen it every year now. It's happening more prevalent where it's kind of this carrot to get guys to sign the pre-arb. Is you want to start in the big leagues right now?
Yep.
Sign this pre-arb extension.
And we'll give you a couple million bonus too. You start in the show. Like, how could you say no?
It's the same thing that I'm talking about Peralta. Peralta's made $23 million in his career. I'm like, put $30 million in a signing bonus in front of Freddy Peralta and see what he does. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling he takes the deal. Last question I have for you. I doubt that you've looked at the zips for Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, and Francisco Alvarez, but I did this week. This is hilarious to me. Mark Vientos zips projections: 22 homers, 112 WRC plus. Brett Beatty zips projections: 19 homers, 111 WRC plus. Francisco Alvarez zips projections: 21 homers, 113 WRC plus. Zips has these three guys almost identical on WRC plus and homers. If each of them gets to 450 plate appearances this year, which I think is probably where they land, Alvarez as a starting catcher, but obviously you're going to have days off. Mark Vientos at first base and DH, and Beatty playing all over. 450 plate appearances for each of them. Which bat do you think finishes with the most home runs, and who finishes with the highest WRC plus?
Most homers is Francisco Alvarez.
Wow. Okay.
I think this is the year that we finally see him no longer try to have an identity crisis at the plate, right? Like and also just being healthy. He hits the living crap out of the ball. I think he's gonna hit his homers this year. I do wonder what the OBP and everything's gonna look like. I'm gonna take Alvarez for both, to be honest. I'm gonna take Alvarez for WRC plus, and I'm gonna take Alvarez for home runs. That said, the safest bet and the one I feel pretty good about, I will always be a Brett Beatty truther. I think he's gonna have a really nice year. But I think he's a good bet for 115 WRC plus, 118 WRC plus. But I think there's a world where Francisco Alvarez can be a top 5 catcher in the game if he does what he's capable of. We had the same conversation with Gabriel Moreno too, and it looks different. But I think both of those guys have been limited by injury. And even then, on a 162-game basis, which I know is not realistic for catchers, but take 30% off of it. Both of them are on like 4-win paces. And still not fully reaching their potential. I think Alvarez has the highest upside of those three by a good bit, but Beatty's the safest. And I think he's proven himself at this point to be an above average big league hitter.
It's funny because when you said top 5 catcher, I was laughing because I said that on the Monday show this week where I compared all these guys where I said I could still see him being a top 5 catcher in baseball if he puts it all together. I'm still buying into that ceiling. And with Beatty, I said, if I could just give up the upside, even though I do think there's upside for more, if I could give up the upside and Brett Beatty could repeat his 111 WRC plus for the next 4 years, and he never tops even 20 homers, I would take it. I would take it because of the defensive versatility he now brings And the fact that if he ends up back at third base, if Bichette walks, I think he's going to be really plus over there. Like I would take that floor from Beatty and just give up the ceiling. But
I will say though, I'm looking at the last 40 games from Beatty, and
it was good.
He hit the ball really harder than Alvarez. It's really freaking good. So I mean, and his job is going to be to hit, a little bit more. But again, I'm going to stick with the Alvarez pick just because I think the ceiling is so high. But I do think if my life depended on it, I might take the safety of Brett Beatty, which is crazy to say given how volatile he's been for a few years here. I'm that bought in on the second half that he had. When you have the swing decisions that he started to show down the stretch, the hard hit rate and quality of contact that he showed down the stretch, I think his floor is solid now.
And now I got to take from my guy Mark Vientos at the end. Always the forgotten man. Vientos hit 32 home runs in 2024 between the playoffs and the regular season in 125 games. And there's so many fans who are ready to give up on this guy. But it's funny, too, because you always see this where it's like, how do all 9 guys fit in a lineup? I'm like, if you have 10 guys on your roster, that's a good thing that you're trying to work in the lineup. It's not going to be an issue getting them all playing time. I think now that Vientos doesn't have to play third base and it's just first base DH, and probably more DH than anything, because it sounds like they really like the idea of Polanco at first. I don't know. I'm not completely out on the idea that Mark Vientos might still end up being the best bat this season. I'm not, but
it's interesting. It depends on how he gets utilized too. I think if he gets a little bit of an extra heavy dose of lefties, he's going to be very successful. My concern is just against some of those high octane righties. Can he perform the same way? But what I like about Vientos is, worst case scenario, you've got another lefty masher in there that I think is going to be able to fill that role at the very least.
Yep, and we'll see exactly how it shakes out for the Mets. But thank you, Aram, for coming on, talking about all this stuff. Looking forward to seeing, hopefully, Jack Wenninger gets on that top 100, because I don't know, only 6 top 100 Mets.
Yeah, getting greedy.
It's just not enough for me. I need a little bit more. So hopefully you can do that for me. All right.
It's looking good. It's looking good. I'm excited to get that out in the next week or two. I'll definitely run some by you.
All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.